Okay. I'm sure people will continue to trickle in, but it's time. So we're going to be prompt and start on time. So welcome everyone to our webinar today, Rebranding, 19 questions to ask before you start. And thanks for choosing to spend some time with us today. We have some really excellent content prepared for you, and I think you're really going to love it. So just by way of brief introduction, I'm Garrett Jestice. I am head of marketing at Lucidpress, and I'm joined today by our guest speaker, David Brier, who is a world-renowned branding expert. And just to give you a brief background on David, David's work has been featured in Fast Company, Forbes, Inc., Business Insider, and Huffington Post, just to name a few. He works with a select list of clients in the US and overseas across nearly every industry. From Revlon to startups, his work helps clients grow through a properly orchestrated sequence of steps that sidestep the most common mistakes companies make when rebranding. And one of my favorite pieces, David, maybe the most impressive, is Damon John, the branding expert himself and star of Shark Tank, has said that David Brier is brilliant with branding, which is pretty awesome, pretty impressive. So David, thanks for being with us today. It's great to have you.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm pumped. I am pumped.
Great. Well, hey, before we jump in, I want to just lay a few ground rules here and let those who are watching know about a few things. So I want to let everyone know that after David shares his tips with us today, he's also going to take some time to answer some questions that you have. We're going to do some Q&A. So if you have any questions about rebranding that you would like to ask David, click on the Q&A button that you should see at the top of your screen and send us your questions. We'll then do our best at the end to answer as many of those as we can. And then also, just as a quick little plug, David has actually put together an ebook on branding that he's going to offer exclusively for webinar attendees today. So that's going to be a reason enough to stick around to the end, I think. And I've had a chance to look through that ebook already, and I can tell you it's pretty awesome. So hang around to the end, and David will also be sharing that with you. So David, maybe to kick things off, I'm wondering if you could tell us what prompted you to put together this list of 19 questions to ask before you start a rebrand?
Absolutely. No, it's a very, very good point. Basically, what happened was I found that, I've been doing this for over 35 years. And in the course of that span of time, there were questions that routinely either they came up or I introduced them in the conversation with regard to rebranding. Because sometimes there are just misconceptions as to why companies rebrand and do different things. And I found, these routinely come up, they consistently. So I figured I would actually put together this list of 19 questions to ask before you start. And during the course of that, it's actually the #1 organic result on Google. If you actually Google rebranding, it's actually, after the few paid ads at the top, you'll actually find that it's the #1 organic one on the entire World Wide Web, which is insane.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we're excited to jump in. I guess we'll kind of turn the time over to you and let you share the content that you have for us.
Absolutely. And for those that are listening, I'm a native New Yorker. Okay. So I can talk fast. So if you find that I'm talking faster than you're understanding it, feel free to make a note in the comments, and Garrett will kind of go, hey, David, just kind of like, just go into decaf mode just a little bit. I've been compared to a triple shot espresso, so let's let it rip, and here we go. So the first thing is, I want to go over some ground rules. Now, here's the point. One is the greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, but the illusion of knowledge. Now, I don't like to ever relay information that's designed to be useful to you and put it over like something that might be a false idea. So I'm not putting here an idea like, something that's a pretty good idea or that hasn't been proven out. But I want to basically put there a factual bit of information. So it's not a matter of ignorance over what rebranding is, but what if you had maybe just a piece of the puzzle or some little bit and piece here and there? Well, that would make it only partially effective for you. So basically the point here, the greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance. It's not that you don't know about branding, but there may be some point. You may have had some component. So I don't want you to know 30% or 40% or 50%. I'd rather you know closer to 90 or 100% of what rebranding is about, and that's what this is designed to do. And the other is rules enable you to follow, knowledge enables you to lead. What I specifically mean by that is I'm going to be going over some points here. I don't want these to function as rules that you can rely on as crutches. I do not advocate ever to have an idea that is, oh, that's a good idea. Let's just now sort of rely upon that and depend upon that. I'd rather give you knowledge that allows you in your everyday activities to have knowledge and insight and go, well, and know when to ask a question. Like, why are we doing that? Rather than, oh, well, it says here, step 1 is this, step 2 is this, step 3 is that, and let's sort of just follow it. Okay? So the whole point here is rules enable you to follow, but knowledge enables you to lead. And I want to give you tools and knowledge that will allow you to lead in the area of branding. So content-wise, here's what we're going to be going over today. Why companies rebrand. First thing, why do they rebrand? Secondly, why brand in the first place? Third, the 19 questions to ask. And lastly, the bonus ebook. And the reason that we're going over the why companies rebrand is we then have a foundation that allows us to know why the 19 questions are even asked and to really get the full benefit of those. Now, this, as Garrett had mentioned, this is what you as an attendee, when at the end of this, I put this together, it will be yours free. We'll give you the download link, and it's a 25-page ebook. It's great. It gives you the 6 steps that previously have only really been made available to our clients. Now this is actually being made available to you in appreciation for you actually attending today's event. So, why do companies rebrand? Well, I'm glad you asked that question. Sooner or later, you'll face a rebrand. Maybe your customers maybe their needs have changed, or the marketplace has gone through a shift, or your demographic is being replaced by a younger, different type of customer. For example, some companies that I work with, they might have been in existence for 50, 60, or 70 years. Well, your actual population is going to start dying at some point. You're going to have to reintroduce and become newly relevant to a new generation. So those shifts occur. The fact is, the world does change. And with today's technology, these changes are happening faster than ever. I mean, look, something can happen in one part of the world 10 minutes ago, and all of a sudden, the world knows about it. It's been tweeted, it's been Snapchatted, it's been put on Facebook, whatever. So to stay relevant, sometimes the correct strategy is a rebrand. Sometimes that is the actual correct strategy. But before you do, there are 19 questions your company must ask. Now, before we go into those, why do we brand in the first place? It's a good question. Have you ever noticed a wall that stands in the way of people understanding how truly great your brand is? You know, you do all the right actions, you take all the social media actions, you do all the different initiatives, you try and stay relevant and this and that, and you make sure you manage things well and you do all of it, but yet there's a wall that you don't quite fully successfully get over. Well, there's something that actually stands in the way. And what that is, one of the key things that is cliches, which is a phrase or opinion that is overused and betrays a lack of original thought. This is one definition of a cliche. And the other is very predictable or unoriginal thing or person. Now, one thing I want to be very clear about, when people hear about cliches, oftentimes they think, oh, that's a phrase. Oh, what you're saying is a cliche. No, that's true. There absolutely are cliche phrases. Especially, you look in certain technologies, you'll find that when people say next generation, very cliche. State of the art, another cliche phrase. You could say a cliche promises that companies oftentimes will use is like knowledgeable staff, caring customer service, responsive design. These are all cliches. This is nomenclature. This is stuff that you talk about, but that's not the way your customers talk. Now, but besides there being phrases that are cliches, there are also cliche images. You could use images that are cliches. You could use colors that are cliches. Certain industries use colors and they're very predictable. So if you put predictable with and have that synonymous with cliches, you get the idea. You don't want any images that are cliches. You don't want any language that are cliches, colors that are cliches. etc. So using cliches prevents any brand from, one, being seen. You're not going to be seen if you don't even attract anybody. If you're doing the same thing as everybody else, you won't even be seen in the first place. Two, even being understood for what you are, and or shifting misperceptions. If people have an idea of you and you're doing the same old thing as you have been doing as your competitors, you will not shift misperceptions. And misperceptions are examples of, like, when you're pigeonholed. If you've ever found your company or your industry being pigeonholed, there you are. Cliches have contributed to that, and your use and engagement of cliches are part of the problem. So cliches are our enemy. Now that we know our enemy, we need a definition for branding, and that brings me to this visual I want to show you. Now, the interesting thing is, and I've presented this to thousands upon people from around the world. Everyone always says, well, which one did I notice first? Well, the green one, obviously. They always add the obviously. I'm like, well, is it that obvious? Right now, we have a 3-to-1 ratio that you would have noticed the amber ones first. But which one did you notice? You noticed the green one. Why? Because it was actually different. So what is branding? Branding is the art of differentiation. That's what branding is. If we're introducing something in a way that allows us to be seen as not the same as all the other options, because we're one search away from having how many hundreds, thousands, or millions of alternative solutions to whatever we're shopping for, whether it's a service or a product. So the art of differentiation, it is not a luxury. It's not like, let's differentiate if we get around to it. No. Differentiate if you want to survive. So, some examples. I just want to show you some before and after examples in terms of differentiation. If you look on the left, this is based out of Napa Valley, the most amazing and delicious shortbread cookies that I ever had eaten. And I got a call from Sandra, the owner, and after finding out what they were, now, first of all, let's look at this design. This design, you can look at it, you could either like it or not like it. It's not a matter of like or not like, but the thing is you take something like this and you put it in a package that's 1.5 inches, let's say it's 1.5 inches or even 2 inches wide, you stand back 3 feet as would be the basic distance that you would stand in an aisle, you wouldn't be able to actually even read it. Plus, it's not showing anything having to do with food. It's actually showing a nice little nature thing with leaves. Well, we're not selling leaves. So what we did here is we turned the leaf into a smiling leaf with that little smile, that little sort of mischievous smirk. And so we have that natural, delectable, unapologetic botanical bakery. And how that turned into, this became their brand vocabulary. Now, many of you are probably managing a brand that has either many flavors or sizes or products or line extensions. This gives you an idea of how this actually stretched out. And Lucidpress, obviously, they have tools that help you manage this very successfully. So what you have here is you see all the different flavors, and you see how we've color coordinated the flavor with a different typographic styling, but it also color coordinates with the style of the lips. So like lipstick, we have these changing lips, but yet there's a beautiful unification. You're never confused. What brand of shortbread cookie is this? This is how the actual packaging looked and it evolved into. And there's just another example. Now, here's a brand. This is a PR company. This is in the service sector, okay? Johto Public Relations. They service all of these innovative and disruptive organizations, companies of all various types that are ready for exponential growth. And Johto has an unrivaled track record. What they do for companies is amazing. And we have worked with them actually just over the past 2.5 months to create and redefine. So they really had a brand that reflected what they were. And it was about disruption, exposure, and influence. And this is the new brand. And this is what that actually looks like. And then, even with this, you get to see how it looks on social media. So, here's another company, a global company. They service Korea, Mexico, the United States. This was a brand that was very outdated looking. Enhanced human life, very cliche. What did that actually mean? They're offering supplements, but this is a very, very dated look. This is what we became of it in the rebrand. You see how it went from a look that wouldn't necessarily wouldn't translate well small or large, but also looked dated. Now we use negative space, created the human figure with nature, and Zacta Life Rebuilt. And they're about rebuilding lives in terms of the nutrition and how their whole business model. And this was their before, how their brand actually looked before. You see, it's almost impossible. How do you know from one brand to the next? It was inconsistent. But in addition to that, look at the Alpha PXP, the one on the left. You see that little in Zacta, they have a little figure. It doesn't even communicate. You don't know exactly what it is. This is what it became. This shows you a level of consistency, professionalism, and there's a caliber to the look. And then Dunn Brothers, a fantastic regional franchise, a coffee franchise. This is what their look had. There were some issues. Again, it did look dated. The bold standard. Now, I'm very much of a coffee connoisseur and a coffee fanatic, so I really search out excellent coffee. Now, the bold standard, if you're into coffee, bold tends to mean stronger, and not everybody loves a stronger. Some people like a light roast. It doesn't mean a weak roast, but it's a lighter roast, and it just has a different taste profile. The bold standard didn't actually communicate across the spectrum, so this became the rebrand, Dunn Brothers Coffee, the official home of taste. And as part of this rollout, we created these in-store menus as well as packaging, which you'll see in the ebook that we actually give you at the end. But this is their before, this is their after of the website. You see a total difference in how we're actually presenting it. I don't know about you, but if you're into coffee, I definitely want the after. I want that like right now. Then we created these menus. Now, these are very intricate menus. The typography is very intricate, but the whole goal was for this to have a very chalkboard look and feel, and you get to see the look and the feel. This looks authentic. It looks real. It's engaging. It's tasty. Food sells. If you know how to do it right, it really sells well. Plus, we use the darker chalkboard backdrop and allow the imagery to actually stand out. So you get the idea there. So that's why we rebrand. So now you're probably going, okay, we've seen enough. What about the 19 questions? I'm glad you asked. And here we go. So number one, you need to ask, why are we doing a rebrand? Okay. Oftentimes this is a very glossed over detail. Why are we doing a rebrand? It's like, well, are we doing a rebrand because we've grown out of touch with our audience? Or have we experienced more competition than we had before? I have companies who 20 years ago, they were the first company in the industry, but now they've got 20 companies or 10 companies that they're competing with. Well, now that's a totally different landscape. So really the question you ask is, would our brand in today's environment have the same relevancy as it did when we had no competition? So you have to answer, why are we doing a rebrand? It's not something sort of like, you know what? It's been a while, let's make a change. You don't do it for that reason. You do it for a very strategic reason. And you do it for relevancy. Sometimes it's like, we don't think it's as pretty as it should look. It's not a matter of being pretty or not being pretty. Of course, a good-looking brand is going to attract more people, but something designed for men is going to be attractive in a different way than something designed for women. Or women over a certain age will have a different aesthetic that they find appealing than women of a younger age. So why are we doing a rebrand? Number one question you need to ask. Number two, what problem are we attempting to solve? Maybe it's confusion. I'll give you an example of one brand that I had to actually address. I had a client that's selling a great line of gluten-free gourmet cookies. But the thing was, all the packages, when you put them all together, and I think there were 15 flavors, they all looked the same. Unless you actually lifted each package and held it 12 inches from your face, and read all of the words, you wouldn't know it was a different flavor, because the cookies themselves that you saw through with the packaging they didn't look very different from one another. So it demanded that the consumer had to actually have you're already giving them built-in problems. So what problem are we attempting to solve? Is it a logistical problem? Is it a tactical problem? Are we getting lost on the shelf? Are we not even being seen as valuable when we arrive at the person, these are the types of things you have to ask. Number three, Has there been a change in the competitive landscape that is impacting our growth potential? I've touched upon that. That's important. No brand exists as an island, okay? No brand exists as an island. You always have to be looking around, what's the noise level? I refer to this as noise level. Sometimes the noise level changes where it's no problem. And then all of a sudden, especially if you're in the technology space, you'll find tomorrow someone can unveil a new app or some new technology that changes everything on a dime. And so what is the competitive landscape, and is that impacting our growth potential? Sometimes it'll be in your favor, sometimes it won't, but you have to be nimble. You have to be fluid. Number 4 question, has our customer profile changed? That's a very possible thing. Customer profiles can change due to a number of factors. Let's say if there are new innovations and all of a sudden, like for example, go back 20 years ago, would you have ever found Chipotle and different exotic brands, or exotic, quote unquote, but would that have really penetrated as opposed to like today, it's everywhere. You have Qdoba, you have Chipotle, you have different types of ethnic cuisines that are gaining popularity. And of course, you get the mainstream, you get the McDonald's, and you get the Burger Kings, and you get those guys who then start to adopt those. And what yesterday's innovation becomes today's normal. So you can never ride on yesterday's innovation. Yesterday's innovation is eventually, sooner or later, it's going to become the normal. The smartphone, big innovation. Now it's the first thing that people look at when they wake up, and it's the last thing they look at before they go to sleep. Good or bad, it's changed the lifestyle. And people walking around the streets with their heads down. 20 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case. People actually walked around. Some looked at the concrete. Some looked at the sky. Some looked at you. But now people are looking and they're checking their social media statuses, et cetera, et cetera. Number 5 question. Are we pigeonholed as something that we and our customers have outgrown? A very, very, very common problem. Oftentimes what happens is, especially if you've been in the industry, if you've been in business for, let's say, 10, 20 or more years, oftentimes a company will have been in the business and they started out in a particular way. So I'll give you 2 quick examples. There was a dance institution out of Seattle that I did a rebrand for. Well, what happened was, at the time that they started, and 25 years ago is when they started, and they trained 12,000 students. But over that time, when they started, they were primarily with a lot of focus on ballet. So of course their logo had these sort of, what we've seen a lot, a man and a woman in a ballet pose. And when I went to them and I said, so let me ask you something, looking at the rebrand, I said, what percentage of your business actually now is training people in terms of ballet? And they said, well, we actually have about, I think, 15 to 18 different styles of dance. So ballet now only represents about 15% of our actual, how many people actually come to actually get trained for ballet. So that leaves 85% unrepresented. You see, so they pigeonholed themselves by not keeping up to date with their own evolution and growth. So that happens a lot. And sometimes you'll be pigeonholed because of the industry you're in. Let's say, if I were to say, hey, you know what, I'm a lawyer, you probably have some preconceived notions of how much fun I might be after hours, which may be like not a lot of fun, okay? So, but there are different industries. Doctors get pigeonholed, lawyers get pigeonholed, accountants get pigeonholed, and then there are others. Then if you say, well, I'm from Silicon Valley, you're probably pigeonholed in a certain way. You might be seen as a techie in one way or another. So that's the whole thing of like, are you pigeonholed by your own actions or by just what people see in that industry? 6, does our brand tell the wrong or outdated story? You gotta always, I'm always monitoring the story that we tell and as well as our clients tell. Does your brand story, does it tell the wrong or outdated story? Is it no longer relevant? The one I just gave you the example with regard to the ballet, that was obviously an outdated story, right? And so the thing is, you have to talk about the talk. And if I were to start talking about making references, and I'll give you just another little snippet. For those who are music lovers, I love music. I have a ridiculous amount of a music library in our studio here. And one example, there's a website called CD Baby. Now, I loved CD Baby, and I thought it was great. But when I grew up, we had albums, and then it was 8-tracks and cassettes, and then there was the CD revolution, compact discs. Now, any of you who are younger, you're probably going, yeah, I kind of remember those. But those of you who have been around, you go, okay, I remember that transition. And then what happened to CDs? CDs became digital distribution in terms of digital downloads, and now it's digital streaming. So it keeps on evolving. But CD Baby built their brand on CD Baby because they thought that was the future and that would be there infinitely. Well, that makes them sound a little old. So it's a little bit outdated. Now they're changing that branding, trying to become like the website for independent musicians. They're trying to tweak their story, but that gives you a tangible example. Number 7, what do we want to convey? And most importantly, to whom? Okay? What do we want to convey and to whom? I'll give you an example of how important that is. Let's say we walk into a car showroom and we've got a red car. Awesome little red car. It's like, not some fancy, imported exotic, sports car, but a nice red car. Just looks cool, nice design, approachable. So father and a son walk in. You can have the father looking at that and he's thinking to himself, maybe as a possible car for his son, thinking, he's kicking the tires and kicking the tires. And he's going, miles, he's thinking miles per gallon. What's the safety rate? What's the safety rating and all that kind of stuff. That's what he's looking at. Well, the son who's looking at the exact same vehicle is probably looking at it and thinking to himself, chick magnet. So you get the idea. You need to define to whom. You're not going to deliver a message to the son about safety ratings when that's not where his attention is. And you're not going to deliver a message to the father saying, hey, help your son attract more girls. Okay. So that probably would be a different kind of message. So you get the idea. To whom? Number 8, why should anyone care about our brand? It's a brutal question, but you need to ask, so why? It's kind of like one of those, you touch upon it in some of the earlier questions, but really it's like, why should anyone care about our brand? And that helps you tweak it, refine it. You might have to modify some things in your brand, but why should anyone care? That's the rebrand question that cuts through the fat and the fluff and really gets to the honest truth. Number 9, have we isolated exactly who should care about our brand? You don't want to be a generalist when you're identifying who is going to care. I'll give you an example. When Apple first came out with the iPod, not the iPad, it was before the iPhone, before the iPad, but the iPod, that was the MP3 player. And for those of you who have been around, it was like it had the wild commercials where the earbuds and the white connecting cord, and then the white thing, and you had the people dancing on the screen. It was a great product launch, and they cinched it with this great tagline of 1,000 songs in your pocket, right? Amazingly successful, unbelievable. It was the beginning of Apple's domination, really, and becoming, with all the mobile devices around the world. Now, they didn't make the mistake of saying, well, who should care about our brand? And if they answered, anybody with ears, that would have been a useless answer. That's not, so this question is, have we isolated exactly who should care about our brand? In this particular case, the answer would have been people who grew up on computers, and then people who are passionate about their digital assets, and people who love to immerse themselves in that sort of audio-visual experience. That by doing that, they crafted a brilliant message, really redefining what Apple meant to everyone. Question number 10, have their needs or the way they define them changed? You need to look, have your customers' needs changed? Or maybe the way they define them, right? Like for example, some people, like I'm very much into chocolate, for those that know, like really nicely, well-made chocolate. Well, here's the thing. For a while, everyone was kind of like, oh, dark chocolate, great taste profile, and then to widen the appeal to those that might be getting a little bit older, who might not want to indulge in as much chocolate. Oh, it has a great amount of antioxidants, right? It's like, okay, that didn't compromise the flavor, but it's a way to define, what? Maybe I'll have a little more chocolate. So have their needs or the way they define them changed? Number 11. Are we asking our customer to care more about our brand and what it means than we do? That is one of those brutal knife through the heart questions. You go, wow. So are we asking our customer to care? Like sometimes companies, and I've seen companies get very lazy We're like, well, everybody should know. No, branding is not telepathy. Marketing is not telepathy. It is our job as companies, as brands, to bring to the world a clear message. And so we need to be as passionate about crystallizing what we mean and to whom it's relevant as we are expecting our clients and customers to be. Number 12 question, is our brand associated with something that is no longer meaningful? I've already given you a couple of examples like that. I don't think I need to belabor this point, but you get the point. We're tackling it from all different angles so you do not miss out. Is our brand associated with something that is no longer meaningful? If you said, you know what, this is the greatest music loved by 8-track owners, that would obviously be no longer meaningful. Number 13, is our brand out of step with the current needs and desires of our customers? We've touched upon this. Again, it's just another slice to make sure we really are nailing it. Is it out of step with the current needs and desires? Look at the current needs. Look at the desires. They may have shifted. And sometimes it's a subtle shift. And that subtle shift can sometimes be tomorrow's innovation. So look at it. Look at it closely. Number 14, are we leading with our brand direction? I always advocate being a leader. I always advocate, how do we actually lead and not just sort of kind of coast along and be complacent? I consider complacency, it will kill a brand, and complacency is the enemy of innovation. So we never want to be complacent. We always want to lead. Are we inspiring ourselves? Are we inspiring others? Are we getting others to go, wow, that was cool? You know, and a great way to know if you're doing this, do you anticipate the needs of your customers and clients in your actions from the standpoint of user experience as well as everything? You know, like if you bought something and you knew that when the person got that at home that they would need X, Y, Z, maybe you included something like that. It becomes real simple. So are we leading with our brand direction? Now, number 15, this is making sure you don't have a baggage that you're sort of grandfathering into the future. Are we following with our brand direction? Are we just sort of just doing things on automatic? Are we doing things that we don't really know why we're doing them? My most challenging rebrand I'd ever done was the company that was 115 years old. And trust me, when you're getting it wrong and you have 115 years to compound one error on top of another, it's sort of you're sort of digging out from the bottom. And it was the most challenging because one thing sort of triggered another thing, sort of triggered another thing. There was no overarching strategy. There was no brand, no brand rationale. Who are we in the world? What's our role? How are we relevant? And what's guiding us? What's our guiding star that we always keep coming back to? So are we following with our brand direction? You don't want to be following with your brand direction. Number 16, is the goal of this rebrand a stepping stone, evolutionary, or a milestone, which would be revolutionary? Some brands like to just sort of take a little step after another and sort of do a little moderate evolution. Others want to disrupt the world. And so, you know, you have to kind of look, what's your brand? Who's your audience? If you're talking to an audience that are real rebellious, they like innovation, they want that, being an evolutionary brand is going to put you out of step. But if you're dealing with a very slow moving audience, you don't want to necessarily introduce something that's too revolutionary, that's too far ahead of them, that puts you out of sync with them. So this is a matter of like, how in sync are you with your space that you're in? Number 17 question. Will this solution work in 5, 10, and 15 years based on what we can anticipate? This is getting you to look at the future. Oftentimes I'll see brands that are like, well, you know what, this is what we're anticipating in the next 12 months and blah, blah, blah. I said, good. So what are you now anticipating in the next 5 years? What are you anticipating in the next 10 years? We need to look into the future. We need to anticipate. There's enough information out there where we can make good calculations, and they may need to shift. Things do happen. We know that. Business is life, and things happen in business, things happen in life, things shift. All of a sudden, someone gets a bright idea, and now all of a sudden, the entire industry has shifted. You take Dyson vacuum cleaners. He introduced it after 5,000 prototypes. He finally nailed it with the turbine, the whole turbine design. but he used color, which was a very cliched. Vacuum industry hadn't changed in, I don't know, what, 40, 50 years. Just the same old sort of suction system. But he introduced, Richard Dyson, he introduced the turbine system, used design, and it was just awesome, the whole look and the feel of it. And they disrupted the industry. Everyone else became yesterday's vacuum cleaner. This became the new way to vacuum. So from a branding standpoint, it's brilliant because he really became, in this complacent industry, the anti-vacuum cleaner vacuum cleaner. It was very, very cool. Very, very amazing success story. Question number 18. Have we assigned some committee to manage the project versus someone, or at most two people, who is or are focused, inspired, and can lead? Now, I'm going to be very specific here. I do not advocate committees. I understand when there might be a few people that are involved who are responsible for a large company. But oftentimes there are these committees of, let's say, 6, 8, 10 or more people that are sort of put there to sort of control the evolution of it. When that kind of structure, there's a flaw in that, because that tends to be a model for let's now debate, and debate to the point where any innovation is killed, any brilliance, it has the life sucked out of it, and it basically gets watered down and diluted into, okay, what can we all agree upon that no one will be upset about? That is not going to get you sales. That is not going to grow your company. It's not going to build a great brand. So you never want to have assigned a committee that's sort of there as a stopgap. But if you have one or two people who are like, hey, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to achieve, and it's a good, strong goal, and it's one filled with passion and clarity, and we can go after it, that's what you want. You want that. You don't want, I basically say committees are death. And oftentimes when I'm doing that live, remember the first time I said that live, I was very nervous, figuring, okay, I might right now get escorted off the stage. Instead, I got a lot of heads nodding, saying, whew, whew, finally somebody said it. So committees. What I say about committees is that, basically they can kill a brand faster than a room full of politicians. Bada boom, bada bing, mic drop. Question number 19. If we were starting our business today, would this be the brand solution we would come up with? That's one that I really hit people with, because I have to sometimes get them. There's sometimes, if a company's been in existence 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, oftentimes there's an emotional attachment and an emotional tie, and that becomes sort of an unnecessary burden. And so it really is a matter of saying, I understand your connection to that. Now, if we were looking at everything we know today, would we actually create this? And that really tends to, if it'll either confirm, yes, we would, or it really goes, wow, no, this is really irrelevant. It's got too many things that we've carried over just out of habit or out of lack of having a strategy. And so that's a powerful, powerful question. So that takes us through the 19 questions, which I tried to get through in a very, very, succinct and efficient way. So what that brings us to, and I hope that you've got questions with regard to these, that brings us to the bonus. Now here's your download link. It's bit.ly/brand roadmap, bit.ly/brand roadmap that you can download. And with regard to this, what I've done is I basically wanted to put together these 19 questions that routinely come up or are presented, because I've rebranded hundreds and hundreds of companies in every industry, from global brands to regional brands to local brands to cultural events and even cities. And the basic thing that you want is, with the amount of noise hitting your customers, is your brand designed to rise above the noise? That's really what it's all about. And so there you have that. I hope that has sparked some points for you, as well as giving you some questions that you've sent to Garrett so we can actually answer those. Garrett?
David, hey, how's it going? Hey,
it's going great over here. How's it going over there?
I loved this. I've appreciated it. I think these are just excellent tips. So I think this is just great stuff. Personally, I actually really enjoyed question number 6. Does our brand tell the wrong or outdated story? So, for me, I found in kind of my career and And in the work that I've done with Lucidpress, as we work with a lot of companies who are going through rebrands, that telling a consistent brand story is so important to building a meaningful, strong brand. And I've often found that when brands fail in telling that consistent brand story, it's typically not because of those who are tasked with managing the brand or the rebrand, but it's because of everyone else at the organization who just doesn't understand how to tell your brand story, the way to do it. So, like as an example, if you're going through a rebrand, you might spend months. If you're lucky, you're working with someone awesome like David to go through that process, to create a carefully developed brand identity and that brand story. But when let's say, for example, you finish that up, you excitedly share that with your organization, and you only to have your sales team continue to use your old logo on the proposals that they're sending out to potential customers, or your events team continues to pass around that same old off-brand flyer that was created 3 years ago by who knows who, right? Does that sound familiar to anyone listening? I know like as an organization, we've faced that too here internally, even though we're big proponents of building a strong brand. So to that, I want to say that, if that's something that you're faced with, Lucidpress can actually help you with that. Lucidpress is a cloud-based content creation and brand management platform that helps ensure that the content that employees create is on brand. So what happens is you create a handful of templates. They're lockable templates. You can lock down components of those templates like your logo. And you can distribute that with approved brand assets and allow individuals across the organization to customize and then distribute that content as needed. So the big benefits from this is it definitely frees up designers' time to work on more meaningful projects, like let's say your next big rebrand, right? And it also helps ensure that your brand is presented consistently. So my short little plug is, if you're interested in learning more about how Lucidpress can help your organization build a more consistent brand, you can see the link there at the bottom of the slides, bit.ly/Lucidpress demo. We'd love to talk to you. So reach out, let us know what your problems are, and we'll see if we can figure out a way to help you build a more consistent brand. So, hey, David, should we get on to the Q&A now?
I think that is a perfect thing we should do.
We've had a whole bunch of questions come in. So we'll do our best to get to these as quickly as we can and try and answer as many of them as we can. If we don't get to your question, feel free to reach out to us afterwards. We'd be happy to follow up with you one-on-one and answer those questions. So first off, before we jump in, David, there have been a whole bunch of people who have asked, hey, are we going to get the recording of this? Yes, don't worry. After this is over, we're going to send you an email. It'll have the recording of this webinar, so you can go back. If you joined late or you forgot to take notes, you can come back in and write down what all of those tips were that David just shared. So with that said, I want to jump into some of these questions. So one of the first questions that we have a lot of them, so we'll see what we can do. So one of the first questions we had asked was by an anonymous viewer who said, how would rebranding improve a hobby collectors group to gain membership? And they said that they're actually a group that collects beer items. So how could a rebrand really help them gain membership there, David?
Well, I'll put it this, without knowing the specifics of how their brand is today, the bottom line is they want to have, obviously the beer drinking community there's a different culture. There are qualities that beer drinkers share, kind of like qualities. Let's take a comparable brand. Let's say, at least in terms of culture, Harley Davidson, right? The Harley Davidson, owner, that there's a culture that goes with it, that freedom on the open road, weekend warriors and all that kind of stuff. There's that culture. So you want to have your brand. If you were finding you were not necessarily connecting as a community and such like that, I'd really look at it. Plus, I think visually that there's a lot of fun, because there's a certain aesthetic that tends to go with like beer labels. So maybe your rebrand, if it just looks institutional or whatever, and it doesn't look exactly in sync with that, that might be an inspiration where you might be able to say, you know what, let's look like the most amazing beer label that's ever been done. And that would probably engage more beer drinkers to join your brand, provided that they're sober enough to sign up.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's for sure. Well, I think it's a great answer. I mean, switching directions a little bit. We have one that's similar, but from kind of a different industry. So Karen asked, as a nonprofit working with national parks, we're happy to embrace the competitive landscape. How do we differentiate our brand without alienating our peer organizations who are our partners in some case?
So it's a fine dance. I can appreciate that question very, very much. And we recently, actually, I'm just in the process of literally rebranding over the last 4 months, 2 totally different nonprofits on 2 totally different sides of the world. One in the technology space and one in the sort of more of the health space. And what I can tell you is that there's a fine dance. Yes, you want differentiation, but differentiation doesn't mean, let's say, we're better than all you and all you are rotten. You know, that differentiation isn't antagonism, in other words. Differentiation can just be, what are the nuances that make us unique? Are there things, that make us desirable, that we're known for, that are really our anchors as far as something special as a park that complements but can't be found in the other ones? That becomes part of your brand story. And then visually, you don't want to look like just like, oh, that's another park thing, unless the majority of your visitors are, you know what, we have national park enthusiasts, and that's what they look for. So, so part of it is, it would be defining who are your actual enthusiasts that will become tourists. We rebranded a city once, about 9 years ago. We found by rebranding them properly, and again, we didn't do it in such a way so as to make them antagonistic or unfriendly toward surrounding cities, but we gave them a defining voice, and what they saw was a 500% increase in tourism in the next 12 months after that rebrand. So if done right, you really can see the return.
Yeah, that's great. David, we've had a whole bunch of people asking for that bit.ly link again. Would you mind going back a few slides to the ebook download link?Ll just leave that up there so anyone who might want that can go to that link right now.
Right there, bit.ly /brand roadmap.
Perfect.
bit.ly /brand roadmap right there.
Perfect. Okay, a few other questions. We have a few more minutes left, so want to get to some more of these. Ben asked, David, what are your thoughts on creating a living brand? How do you set up a brand to evolve with the world around it? And
well, that's a very good question.
Closely related to that, someone asked, is there a way to avoid ever having to do a rebrand, or is it something that's just kind of inevitable, right?
Okay, so first of all, I think all brands will evolve. Some are going to evolve. Now, obviously, a rebrand is when it has to really evolve. It has to take a much more dramatic step. That's generally what's associated with a rebrand. Sometimes there's incremental rebrands where you might see bits and pieces, such as it might be like a brand refresh. They might polish it up or clean it up, and I've seen those. And when we're talking about a rebrand, yes, that's part of it, but that's really incremental. But what we're talking about, I consider every brand to be a living brand. I don't consider a brand, I don't want anybody to have the notion that, that brand, now that we've locked it in, it's unchanging and it's sacred and we can't touch it. No, a brand is something you guide and you lead. It's not something that, okay, we've put up that sign, we never have to revisit it again. Because brands are dynamic. Why? Because society is dynamic. And today, with the changes that can happen in the course of a week or a month, there's too much shifting. So I think every brand, for it to be successful, has to build into it a fluidity. I consider a brand a living mechanism. I don't consider it stagnant and unchanging. Look at what we did with the Botanical Bakery. That had a consistency, but we could introduce new flavors. We could do all kinds of stuff because we anticipated where it could go. So if you approach it from the standpoint that a brand is a living, evolving thing, and hopefully it'll skip the teenage years when it rebels against you. But if it's a living and breathing thing, I think that's a good foundation and a good context for you to create your brand.
Awesome. Thank you. So moving on, next question. I thought this was a really good one. So Georgette asked, how much investment dollar-wise can we anticipate in a rebranding? I mean, can you give us an idea of when companies are going through a rebrand, what they can expect in terms of investment, maybe dollars and time?
Okay, I can give you a range, because obviously that's kind of like asking how much is a car, and we could be looking at a Yugo and we could be looking at an Aston Martin. Okay.
Yeah.
So they both have four wheels and they both require gas, and that's about, outside of that, that's where the similarities end. Generally, when you're looking at a rebrand, you'd be looking at you could be looking at sort of a baseline of somewhere around $25,000 upwards of $200,000 as far as a span. And why such a big broad span? Well, if a company says, well, we have offices around the world and we have 150 SKUs, and we also are we're not only in a vertical market, but we're also in blah, 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 blah. Now all of a sudden you have to create an entire system and a brand vocabulary. So that's hence the spectrum. Plus on that upper spectrum, the point about that is, if a company is saying, you know, we've been doing, like, I'll give you a great example of a brand that was so overdue, Radio Shack, who's no longer with us. I mean, talk about a brand that was so hungering for a rebrand. First of all, the name was meaningless. And then their brand, even when they did go through a rebrand, which they did go through, there were stores 15 years after their rebrand that still were carrying the old original. It was a very poorly executed rebrand. But as an example, they had lots of stores that themselves each required the signage to be updated. Now that's an investment. So that's why you get the low end of the spectrum. You know, if it's a newer company, sometimes a rebrand, sometimes companies come to us and they're like, you know what? We've been sort of doing a soft open launch for 18 months. We have proof of concept. We're now ready to actually invest. And so now they can go at the lower end of that spectrum in terms of investment, because they don't have a lot of infrastructure to change. So hopefully that helps clarify.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think it's definitely going to be a wide range. It's going to depend on the situation of the company, right?
That's right.
Next question. Someone asked, if we want to sell our practice in the next 2 to 3 years, is it worth the investment to rebrand before we sell?
Well, it depends on where you are in the structure of your business. Obviously, we're all familiar with the concept of a bell curve. If you're on the back end of the bell curve, where you're actually contracting and you're losing relevance and your patients are dying out, you absolutely better look at a rebrand. Yeah. If instead you're on the upper curve and you're like, no, we're in a real great, strong growth mode, we're in the right neighborhood or whatever like that, that would be a time that you would want to look at going, okay, maybe we might not need one because we have relevance. But again, keep in mind what I mentioned earlier about noise. Let's say all of a sudden, hey, we're doing great, but we know that the competitive landscape is going to change a lot in the next 12 to 18 months. We better be proactive and anticipate that. That's another factor I would look at.
Yeah, that's great. That makes sense. Okay, so 2 closely related questions here. Someone asked, with extreme competition as a realtor, how can a realtor best stand out or be disruptive? And then closely related to that, someone else asked, what are the main differences from branding a person versus a product or a company?
Okay, those are 2 very different things. Okay,
so
let me I'll tackle the realtor one first, then I'll probably have to ask you what that second was again. All right, yeah. So the realtor. Well, one thing I can tell you as an example of having used realtors in the past, one thing I never understood is, why do realtors always have that photograph of themselves on their card? I have never ever chosen a realtor because of the picture on their card. Why do they do that? That to me is a cliche, and that is something I would eliminate instantly. Just to state I'm not like any other realtor. That's the first thing as far as that goes. But realtor, put it this way. Realtors oftentimes, they think it's, they're showing, they always have the headshot. I pass by billboards and I see billboards like, someone's smiling, and they're always in that posed unnatural position anyway. That's never tilted me to go, wow, I love the color of his or her eyes. I'm going to choose them as a realtor. Yeah. So I would really step back and look and say, I would actually, if I were you, whoever you are, I hope you're still listening, I would call up your last 10 customers and say, what made you choose me? And I would also ask this other question. What was the most valuable thing I did for you as a realtor? And then figure out your brand story from those answers. That's that.
Yeah.
Now, the other one, as far as a person versus a company. So it depends. It depends if you have a big personality or not. You take someone like Gary Vaynerchuk or Gary V, as many people know him. Big personality. I mean, bang. You get someone like Richard Branson from Virgin. Another big personality. Or Steve Jobs for Apple. Big personality. If you have that, that could be a weapon in your arsenal of how to stand apart. Now, if you don't have that, you're going to have to rethink it. And maybe you have both. Maybe you have a strong brand and you have that personality. But I don't think it's sort of an either-or equation. The bottom line is we're working at how do we, amongst all the noise that's out there. I mean, here's a statistic I heard recently. You and I get hit with 5,000 media messages every day. Think of that.
Yeah.
How is one going to stand apart from the other? Is it going to stand apart by sounding similar to other stuff? So I would look at the competitive landscape. I would say, okay, you know what? If everyone else is using people, I might choose the company. If everybody else is using companies, I might choose a strong, dynamic person. That's one way to possibly determine which way to go. Mm-hmm. Hopefully that helps us give you a barometer.
Yeah, that's great. It sounds like we may have some broken link problems, but don't worry, anyone who's listening, we will send out an email after with all the correct links. So if links are not working, hang in there. We will send some more out. So I think we just have a few minutes left. I think there's probably two main questions left. That I'm kind of grouping a couple together that are similar. So there's a few people who have asked questions around the topic of renaming a company or a product versus rebranding. Can you kind of help explain the difference there or the similarities?
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing is that oftentimes, so sometimes companies will come and say, you know, blah, 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 we need to rebrand. And so one of the questions I ask is I say, well, how well known is your name? Do you have loyalty? Do people have name recognition? Mm-hmm. That's one issue. Sometimes I've had companies come to me and say, well, you know, yeah, we have okay name recognition, but when people Google in our name, 5 other companies come up ahead of us. Mm-hmm. I go, that's a problem, especially if they're in the same industry.
Yeah.
So, you know, those are some of the criteria that I look at. Do you have do you have real equity in that name in terms of, do people recognize it and ask for it by name, or do they not? You know, I gave you the example of Radio Shack, horrible name. And yeah, did it have name recognition? Sure. But for what? I mean, you know, it wasn't known for the right things. Mm-hmm. It obviously showed up in the fact that they ended up going belly up, and they saw diminishing returns. So you want to look at, you never want to hold on to something just because it's emotionally always been there and it's part of the family. You don't want to have that kind of attachment. You need to be a little cold-blooded and look at it and determine. I mean, one of the rebrands that we recently did, will be unveiling in about 3 weeks, went through a name redevelopment, and there was a little concern. Do we really change it? And I said, well, what are the advantages of keeping it? What are the disadvantages of keeping it? Are there advantages of introducing it? Do people have a pigeonholed idea? I brought the concept about pigeonholing earlier. Mm-hmm. So does your name pigeonhole you to something that you no longer do, or maybe only represents 25% of what you do, leaving 75% being completely misrepresented? Yeah. These are the kinds of questions I would ask.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, last question. I think we just about out of time, but closely related. Someone asked, what are the main differences between a brand refresh and a whole rebrand?
A refresh can be generally more evolutionary and incremental. Okay. You know, it's sort of polishing it up, cleaning it up. It's kind of like the difference between house cleaning and a completely demolition and renovation.
Okay.
It's the best analogy I can give you.
Yeah. So going back to the last question, then, does a rebrand typically involve renaming a product or a company?
I wouldn't say typically. I'd say depending on the answers of the things that I just asked in the last few minutes, depending on the answers to those answers help navigate the roadmap to whether you should or shouldn't. Is there a typical? In general, there's no hard rule. That's one of those things where it goes back to my initial quote of like, rules enable you to follow, knowledge enables you to lead. Hopefully I'm giving you answers to allow you to have the knowledge to go, what are the questions I need to ask to come to the right conclusion? There's no hard rule with that question that was just asked.
Awesome. Well, David, thank you so much. I know we're about out of time. I think we made it through most of the questions. So congratulations on doing that, answering those quickly, and giving us some great content today. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. And for everyone listening, again, we're going to send some links following this webinar as we wrap up, and you'll have all the correct links to download David's ebook and watch the recording for this and everything else. So again, David, thanks for being here. Thanks for everyone for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you guys. And the guys at Lucid, they're awesome. They're total rock stars. So thank you, Garrett, for putting this all together.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you later. Okay.
All right.